live quite yet.
Yeah, 4 seconds ago. It's live now.
It's an upcoming event. Oh, there it is. All right.
Cool, we're live. Sorry about that. The program we used to broadcast this out to YouTube random ass crashed on us. Don't know why, but we are back and we are live. So Ben and I were just talking about the weather issues. So Cleveland and Pittsburgh. We love Isaiah Crowell kind of as a leverage off of the passing games here. We think Cleveland can probably keep this close and can run the ball on the ground, whereas the passing games should struggle, especially the deeper ones. So on the Pittsburgh side, we like the short passing game. Le'Veon Bell is definitely still in play, catching those short passes, running the ball a lot, and Antonio Brown shouldn't be impacted too much. He catches a lot of, short to medium range passes. He does get a few deeper balls, but by and large, I think he'll still be pretty highly used. He still is very, very, very expensive, though. So that's the thing that's kind of just been limiting my exposure to him in general. Anyway, Sammy Coates is almost off the radar. He's kind of a deep ball specialist. So that's kind of what we're thinking with this Cleveland passing game. Another weather situation I wanted to mention, Ben, was that in Washington. So the Redskins play tonight against the Packers. Currently, it's quite windy there in the D.C. area. My brother told me. I've had a couple Twitter users tell me as well. Would that limit your exposure to a guy like Kirk Cousins at all if that held to be true through the evening?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that are in play for me this week. I'm already limiting Cousins in some tournaments just because he's a popular name. I mean, I know most of the time you're not going to see quarterbacks be super high owned, so it's not something where you need to worry about like a full-on ownership fade. But he's a really popular name this week, and I just hadn't got on as much throughout the week anyway. So for me, it's the weather's affecting that a little bit. I'm just not really super on him. What about you?
I mean, I liked him a whole lot leading up to the week. I was definitely on him. I was eyeing him as my cash game quarterback. I still am kind of trying to check the hourly weather forecast and things like that to see if he will be usable later tonight. But it certainly seems like the wind is going to be persisting throughout the evening. So Kirk Cousins is basically off my radar now, just because he is probably going to be a fairly popular play, especially again in those lower stakes tournaments that we were talking about. So Kirk Cousins and Ben Roethlisberger, definitely two quarterbacks I will be fading almost completely, if not completely, in tournaments. It's just too windy in a lot of these areas. So
yeah, and one of the things we were talking about when that crashed, I just want to circle back to, was the Isaiah Crowell play. And I was talking about CJ Prosise in particular. I think that he is not really a GPP play for me. He's going to have really high ownership. We don't really know how heavily involved Thomas Rawls will be, but anything he sees is going to cut into what Prosise saw last week. And in particular, I don't think Prosise has a really high touchdown projection. I think he's a stable player for cash games in the sense that he's going to get some receiving work. You can probably count on him for a few catches. You should count on him for some rushing yards. So I'm fine with him in cash, but for me, he's shaped out this week to be a pretty clear GPP fade because his ownership's going to be really high, and I don't think he really has 20, 25-point upside. So the guy that I'm kind of leveraging to in a lot of spots is Crowell. As you noted, the wind's going to be really bad. If we're concerned about the overall game total, if we're concerned about Pittsburgh's ability to throw the ball effectively and get way out into a lead, I think those comments from Hugh Jackson that he really wants to get the ball in Isaiah Crowell's hands more this week could come to fruition. I think we should see a pretty good workload for him, one of his higher workloads this season. And, he's been a pretty effective running back this year. So at 3,900, I think he's a really good leverage play in tournaments. So as you are also on him, I know. So
yep.
Somebody, before we jumped on, I was saying I'm going to need you to get me off him a little bit because I think I'm going to be a little bit overweight on him. I'm almost a little bit concerned about how heavy I'm going to be on him. But
yeah,
I'm not going to play any Prosise at all in tournaments. So that's going to be part of the reason that I'm going to be so heavy on Crowell.
Makes sense, and I'm totally with you. I'm not playing pro size at all in tournaments. I have literally zero exposure to him. I do have Rawls in tournaments. I think that's a good call there because he probably will be low owned, and people are afraid of using him. Another guy I'm kind of considering that I think is interesting just from a running back perspective in that lower price range is James Starks, especially if it is going to be a weather game, a wind game. They'll probably need to go on the ground a little bit more. So I think he's interesting as well, down in that same price range as Rawls and Procise and so forth. So if I'm going cheap, if I'm going cheap, I like Starks and I like Crowell. I think those are probably my two favorites, along with some Rawls. I won't have as much Rawls as I do Starks or Crowell, simply because Rawls is definitely got some questionable workload and also questionable health situation. But I do think even if I have between 5 and 10% of Rawls, I'll still be overweight compared to the field, and that's a pretty good leverage play there. So I think that's my cheap running back situation this week. Is there anybody else cheap running back wise you're looking at, or is that about it?
That's pretty much it.
Cool.
Yeah, just to echo what you said about Starks, I think he's definitely an interesting play. Came back last week, got 7 carries, got 3 receptions. I think his workload might be even a little bit higher this week. They haven't ran the ball for weeks. That's because they haven't really had a running back. So I think he's overlooked a little bit this week and has the potential to have a pretty decent workload in what's been a remotely efficient offense. They've run a lot of plays. They've scored a lot of points. So he should have some touchdown potential as well. He scored last week on a receiving play. So I think he's really interesting as well. I agree with you there. With Rawls, I'm starting to kind of avoid him. We talked about him a little bit on Thursday. I was interested in him. I do like to play them. I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are saying we need to see it for a week first. But I think you're right that there's some underrated potential for him to just come out and be really healthier than we think. I mean, we saw some good signs to that effect earlier in the week with them cutting Michael early in the week, with Rawls practicing in full starting Wednesday. Initially they were talking about him being out for a month, and he's been out for 9 weeks now. So
yeah, he's had time. He's definitely had his time to recover. And I actually kind of want to jump in. You made me think of something else, but people will be maybe afraid to use Rawls, as you kind of just said. I think another guy that is really, really interesting to me, who will be less than 1% owned, is Dion Lewis if he plays. I haven't seen his status yet, if he'll be active. We're still waiting on the actives for the early games, and then I think he's in the 4:30 game anyway. So you're definitely going to want to keep him in your flex if you do play him, or at least have multiple players in the 4 o'clock range if you do play him. But I think Dion Lewis is super interesting because if he was actually healthy last week, the reason they didn't activate him was because they weren't able to get him off the pup in time or whatever reason, but it wasn't because he wasn't healthy. In a game where they could blow out the 49ers, I think you could see some sneaky late work from Dion Lewis. Maybe he pops in a late touchdown to kind of get him back in the game mode. He'll be less than 1% owned. I wouldn't have more than 5% of Dion Lewis, but I think if you have 5% and the field has 0.5%, that's more than enough leverage off the field, and he's only 3,300. So let's say he catches 3 passes for 25 yards and a touchdown. That's 11 fantasy points. That's like I think he probably even has a little bit more upside than that. I wouldn't go crazy on him, as I mentioned, but I think in a game that could be a really big blowout against San Francisco, I think there's a chance we see Dion Lewis maybe grab a late red zone look as well. So I'm definitely trying to leverage off the chalk in this New England game, whether it's LeGarrette Blount or Martellus Bennett. I'm trying to use some of the other players here. Maybe it's a James White, maybe it's a Julian Edelman. We've got Hogan ruled out, so even maybe sprinkling an Amendola, and then, of course, Dion Lewis. I wouldn't go, like I said, crazy necessarily in any of these guys because they're not the chalk, but I think New England could spread this ball around in this game because they're going to move it so easily. You could almost just play Tom Brady by himself because he could throw 4 touchdown passes to 4 different receivers.
Yeah, that's fair. And there's a question here in the chat about leveraging off Blount to James White. I think that's a fine play. You noted Dion Lewis. I don't have any Dion Lewis this week, but I definitely follow the logic. I mean, if he's healthier than we think, certainly be a surprising, get a surprising workload and be one of those guys that you get a really low ownership on. For me, the guy that I'm really targeting this game is Edelman. I think he's going to end up being a little bit chalky too, but I think he's probably pretty due for pretty heavy usage. He was, heavily used last year, heavily used at times throughout his career, hasn't been as highly used this year. But with Gronk out, a lot of people are going to go to Bennett. I'm kind of off Bennett in tournaments. I think the only shares I have are some stacks with Brady and Edelman, where I'm hoping that Brady throws 4 touchdowns and Edelman has a big game through PPR points, and maybe Bennett catches a couple TDs. And I do think he'll be involved in the red zone. But if he doesn't score, I don't know that I'm super confident in Bennett blowing through value. So I'm kind of fading him due to ownership as well. So yeah, I think it's a good call to leverage off those plays a little bit.
Yep. And it's not like anytime you see chalk, you have to leverage off of them. I just think these are situations, with New England, I definitely want to leverage off that. The Pittsburgh passing game because of the wind, I want to leverage off of that. And then one other leverage play, of course, I think is Cameron Meredith. He seems to be pretty popular. Might be a little bit chalky. I don't think he'll be like crazy chalk, not like in that 20+% range, but I think he might be 10 to 15%. And that is probably, in my opinion, too high for a guy who has just not had a good rapport with Jay Cutler at all. In the 3 games Cutler has been back, he's had 2 targets and 1 catch in every single game. So I'll be leveraging off of Cameron Meredith, either with some Zach Miller, Eddie Royal, those types of guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty underweight on Chicago's whole offense. I have 0 Meredith, and I have Miller in spots where I'm getting that exposure and a little bit of Royal as well. So
yeah, that's same with me. I'm not heavy on the Chicago offense, but I do think Eddie Royal at 3,400 or Zach Miller at 3,800 aren't terrible plays, especially if you do think Meredith will be 10 to 15% owned.
Yep, and I agree with you about New England. I mean, I think the key point there is we don't know where this offense is going to go. I mean, it could go a lot of different ways against San Francisco. You can kind of do whatever you want against San Francisco. So it could be a blunt game. It could be that we don't know how they're going to game plan. We know that Belichick game plans differently pretty much every week, depending on things he sees on film and all those things. So the confidence in Bennett, I mean, that's exactly why with the high ownership, why it becomes a fade for me. It's like, maybe Bennett stays in the block a lot. Maybe James White is the guy. Maybe Edelman's the guy. Maybe they just run a ton. We really don't know how they're going to attack. And so I do think that lowers the floor for a lot of the guys in the offense other than Brady, basically. But one game I wanted to jump into was the Detroit and Jacksonville game. We discussed this a little bit on Thursday. We were both pretty interested in it. The kind of 2 receivers that I've really kind of been going back and forth. I mean, we liked Hearns. We liked a lot of the Jacksonville options. But the 2 receivers on Detroit I've been going back and forth with are Jones and Tate. They're very simple. Priced on TK, 5,300 and 5,000. Tate's the higher one. And then you have Ebron, you have Riddick that are also probably in play. How are you attacking the Detroit passing game?
I think for me, I just love Marvin Jones' price. I mean, he's at 5,000, which is kind of close to where he was at the beginning of this year when he was just absolutely going ham. And he has clearly that potential in him. He could do what he did at the beginning of the year. And if you get him at a $5,000 price tag, that's massive. Golden Tate also in that same price range as you mentioned. He has a little bit less propensity to go bananas. He still can. He just isn't as likely to go bananas as Marvin Jones is for me. And there's, you and I were talking about this throughout the week. The Pro Football Focus matchup chart and then Mike Clay's matchup charts have Jalen Ramsey shadowing. One of them has him shadowing Marvin Jones, and one of them has him shadowing Golden Tate. So we really don't actually know what the situation will be there. Is kind of what it could be, and he might not even shadow anybody. So I'm
that's kind of my expectation. That's what we were discussing.
Yeah, and so I think
him as a shadow candidate on 2 different receivers, the expectation is probably that he's not going to shadow anybody.
Yeah, so I think that leaves them both open to have potential big games, and I just think in that situation, I'd rather have Marvin Jones at 5,000 than Golden Tate at 5,300. And I do think this game will be a bit of a shootout. I think it's going to go over. I think this is actually a situation where Blake Bortles for Jacksonville will not struggle as badly as he's been struggling because Detroit's defense is so bad, and then that means Detroit will need to pass. So I think one of these 2 receivers go off, and for me, it's most likely Marvin Jones. And, Theo Riddick will be an option. I just don't think he has Marvin Jones upside, where Marvin Jones has a 30, 35-point game upside. I think Theo Riddick probably has 20 to 25-point game upside. So, and he's 5,100.
Yeah, I mean, and I liked Riddick coming into the week. My concern is he is uh, going up against Jacksonville, who has a number one DVOA, pass DVOA versus running backs. I mean, I know they use Riddick split out wide in kind of a receiver role as well, but if his receiving work is hurt, we know he's not a super efficient running back. Jacksonville's rush D is bad, so he should get a boost in the run game by you know by way of his matchup. But if his receiving volume is hampered at all by playing a team that hasn't allowed a lot of receptions to the running back position, and he's questionable still. He's supposedly pretty healthy, but I'm a little bit concerned about him. I like him at his price, but I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, and we mentioned we'd rather just pay down a few $100 to go into that $4,300 price range in the running back position, 4,200, 4,300, and use some of the backs there all the way down to 3,900 at Crowell. So I'm with you there. I think that Detroit passing game, I'm going to be Marvin Jones or bust almost. I think I might sprinkle in a touch of Riddick. I might sprinkle in a touch of Tate. Right now I haven't yet because if you were following me on Twitter, I had a little bit of a laptop snafu last night, and usually I set my lineups last night, so I've been kind of cramming this morning. But as of right now, I'm all over Marvin Jones in this Detroit pass offense. And then, as we talked about with the Jacksonville side of things, we both love Allen Hurns. When we're on a guy separately, we've had that a few times this year. They just seem to go bananas. It was Golden Tate the week that Golden Tate was in the Millie Maker winning lineup week. We were both on him. We were both separately on Jeremy Hill. So I like when we both are independently on a guy. That always makes me feel good. And I think Allen Hurns is the man this week. So I picked him in my play of the week. I wrote him up in basically every single article I wrote this week, and we talked about him on the Thursday show. So I'm all in on Allen Hurns. He's probably going to be my highest owned wide receiver, and I don't think he'll be anywhere close to being a highly owned wide receiver.
I'm gonna disappoint you here, but I'm wavering a little bit.
Why?
Marquise Lee, so I've gotten down.
No.
On it.
No, Marquise Lee is terrible. Oh,
I
man.
know, but he's getting targets, and that I think.
But
impact.
Hurns he's had 7 targets in 4 of his last 5 games, 7 or more. He's had 7, 11, 7, 11, and 4.
And that's Hurns, right?
Hurns, yeah.
Yeah, and he's been getting a lot more red zone work as well. So I'm still on him. I still have him in about 10% of lineups. I'm just not all over him. But I agree with you. I think he's a strong play this week. I had a question for Jones or Tate in cash. I actually have Tate in my cash lineup right now. It sounds like you're more on Jones, but Tate's volume has been a little bit.
I'm not using either in cash. Yeah, I'm not using either in cash. I think there's too much uncertainty with who will be covered by Ramsey or not. And I think they'll both see pretty decent volume, and I just think you can look other places at wide receiver this week. I don't think they're terrible plays in cash. I just personally don't have either. If I had to pick one, I think I'm with you, Ben. I think I'd go with Tate. He's definitely the more stable option.
Yeah, interesting note from Ryan Hodge in the chat here that A-Rob's receiving prop bet is 69.5. Tate's is 65.5. So you're getting I
like it.
Receiver one. I mean, basically as high as A-Rob. I think that's pretty interesting because he's significantly cheaper. Another comment, digging Julius Thomas in this spot too. I like him. I mean, obviously it's a good matchup. My concern is he hasn't had more than 25 receiving yards, I think it is, for 5 or 6 straight weeks. So you're really hoping for a touchdown. I think he scored in 3 out of his last 4 games. So it's certainly possible, but I've gotten off him a little bit just because I like Zach Miller a little more. He's only $300 more on DK. In tournaments, and then obviously
yep.
as well. So other tight ends there.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. No real huge interest on Julius Thomas. He's in a good matchup though. Let's check the RotoViz live hashtags.
There's nothing. Nothing right now. So yeah, I think with the
I had some other questions I wanted to pick your brain on that I've been
sounds
thinking.
Great. Yeah.
Quarterback. I want to know who your price agnostic top quarterback play is. I mean, I've really been vacillating a little bit in looking. I'm on a lot more quarterbacks than I usually am this week, and I know. I'm kind of struggling to narrow that down. So
I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I like a lot of quarterbacks this week. But if I, like you said, price agnostic for me, it's going to be Andrew Luck. I think this game has 60-point potential in terms of the total in this game. I think Tennessee's playing really well lately. They've been moving the ball. They've been scoring. Marcus Mariota's been on fire, and Indy's not a great defense. And then you've got Indy at home. So I think Andrew Luck is if you're saying price agnostic, I think Andrew Luck is my top play.
Yeah, he's right there with me too. I was kind of looking between him and Brady. Obviously, you do get a huge discount salary-wise to
Yep.
go from Brady down to Luck.
I think the biggest issue with Brady is they could also just run the ball over San Fran. So I think Brady has just as much upside, if not even more, maybe than Luck. But I think he has a little bit more downside as well.
Fair point. Yeah, one thing I was looking at with Luck, I was a little perturbed to see that he only had like 14 points last week against Green Bay, which is, the matchup that we're all digging for Kirk Cousins this week. And, I'm struggling with Luck, I guess, but you're definitely calming my nerves there a little bit. Where else should we go here? We talked earlier in the week about Delaney, Jordan Reed. You were more on Reed. I was more on Delaney.
Yeah, I think with the win now, it's kind of disappointing. I don't think it hurts Reed a ton. Obviously, he's not getting a ton of deep balls, but it might dampen my expectations a little bit for him. I have a little bit of Delaney. I don't have a ton. I like this game a lot, but if I'm going to pick a tight end in a super high total game, why don't I just pick like Jack Doyle? He's going to be like 3% owned because Dwayne Allen's back, and people will be on other tight ends this week, and he's got the highest team total other than the New England team total, and team total is very, very, very important for the tight end position. So I think Jack Doyle is just a fantastic play if you're stacking this Tennessee Indy game on either side. Whether you're stacking the Indy side, he's a great play, and even if you're stacking the Tennessee side, you can have him as kind of that comeback correlation play. So I like Jack Doyle's upside in this one because of that team total.
Fair enough. Yeah, I hadn't really been considering him, but that's an interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the point is like nobody's considering him, right? And he, even when Dwayne Allen was in at the beginning of the year, he had 2 touchdowns in a game, and then the next game he had like 9 receptions for 100 yards and stuff like that. So even with Dwayne Allen, he's got this upside of 15 to 20 points for $3,300 on DraftKings. So I mean, if you can get 20 points from your tight end for 3,300, that's awesome.
Cousins or Luck in a GPP, I think that comes down to basically how the best of your GPP lineup looks.
I think at this point it's Luck because that 25-mile-an-hour wind in Washington kills Cousins' upside.
Another comment just said that wind speed in Washington showing 17 miles per hour or less tonight. It's obviously the night game, so I wonder if the wind will be.
It's supposed to go down a little bit, but it'll still be over that 15-mile-an-hour threshold. Deshaun Jackson is probably going to play, but he's essentially a guy you can't play because he is a deep threat with this wind issue. I know right now it's super windy. I've had people telling me it's super windy. The forecast does say it's going to go down, but right now it is 25 miles an hour for sure. And if it goes down even 8 miles an hour, it's still 17, which is over that 15-mile-an-hour threshold, which lowers upside. This is something Jim Sonis from Number Fire showed. It absolutely does lower upside in games that are 15 miles an hour or up. So, I would take Andrew Luck in a dome in the highest total game of the weekend any day over Kirk Cousins in a wind game.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially if you're just looking at the quarterbacks. I was going to say in terms of pairing with their targets, the guy that I want to pair with Luck is T.Y. Hilton, and that stat gets a little bit pricey. I know a lot of people like Moncrief this week as well, but for me, Moncrief has a lot of touchdown potential, but he doesn't have a ton of reception and yardage potential, or he hasn't shown that often. If you look at his game log, even going back to last year, got a lot of like 6 for 6 games. And if he does get the TD, you're at 18 points or something, but seems to be a little tougher for him to hit the 100-yard mark, get the 3-point bonus on DK. Seems a little tougher for him to really have those blow-up games unless maybe he catches touchdowns, which I suppose is possible. But
yeah,
for me, it's Hilton that's the high upside GPP play.
Yeah, I'm playing both of them. I'm stacking Luck with different combinations of his receivers, because I think you don't want to just not have enough Moncrief or not have enough Jack Doyle, and you've got a lot of T.Y. Hilton, and I'm not saying you're doing this, just you in general. You don't want to do that, and then Indy throws for 35 points, and T.Y. Hilton only had 70 yards and 5 catches, and Moncrief had 2 touchdowns and Doyle had a touchdown, and they ran for a touchdown or something like that. So I think in high total games, you definitely want to get exposure to these offenses, but you also want to mix it up instead of going super heavy. Now, I agree with you. I think T.Y. Hilton is my favorite, so I have the most exposure to him, but I definitely will be overweight on probably all pieces of this Indy offense, as well as certain pieces of the Tennessee offense.
Fair enough. Just checking RotoWorld, because we're going to probably get some inactive news here, which is kind of why we do this time slot, so we can talk about inactives at the end of the show. And one of the notes here is that the game total on Sunday night's game has dropped by 2 to 3 points. So that's interesting. There was a question.
Yeah, I have weather.com open right now, and I have NOAA open, and weather.com says the game time weather is supposed to be between 20 and 23. NOAA says it's supposed to be 17 to 20. So you're definitely over that 15 mile an hour threshold for the night game, I would think, based off of the different weather sites. So I think that's definitely why the total is coming down.
Yeah. And I had a question in chat. Would you still use Cousins in cash? I'm not using him in cash. I don't know about you.
I wouldn't use him in cash either. I know it definitely limits upside. It probably doesn't hurt your median projection a ton, as much as it hurts upside, but if it hurts median projection, that's something to be cognizant of. So I'd probably look elsewhere if you can find a better deal in cash games.
Another interesting one is the Chicago and Giants game has also dropped by 4.5 points. I've noted here. I mean, that's another wind issue in New York, and apparently was bet pretty heavily on the under. The only really interesting name in that game for me earlier on was Odell Beckham, but I don't think I'm going to probably play him if there's significant wins. So,
yeah, I think Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown are 2 guys who are probably the most or the least impacted by wind, but I'm with you there. Even if they're a little bit impacted by a wind at their price tags, it's really hard. Right. And there's a lot of good expensive wide receiver options this week. We talked about T.Y. Hilton. I think Mike Evans is a good option. I think A.J. Green has a great matchup. I love A.J. Green. He'll probably be the lowest owned of that expensive tier, so I'm trying to definitely get exposure to A.J. Green. There's Allen Robinson, of course, is in play. I don't love him, but he's in play. And then so I think, in this expensive tier, you don't have to play Odell Beckham or Antonio Brown in your lineups. You can play lineups without either of them and be totally fine, especially because of the weather situations we've got up in the, the northern and eastern portions of the United States.
Yeah, my lineup construction, I've kind of been going away from a lot of the really high-priced options. I think there's concern for some of the top running backs as well. We discussed Ezekiel Elliott on Thursday. I think he's a really strong play, but especially with the rising running back price tags, you have Ezekiel Elliott over 8,000 going up against the number 1 DVOA rush D. I mean, I think he's in a tournament play probably to be a little bit contrarian, but I'm not going to be on him. I don't think I have him anywhere.
Dez Bryant, right?
Yeah, I'll play a little bit of Dez. So not going up for him. I don't even love Le'Veon Bell because he's all the way up at 8,800. And
I love Le'Veon. I'll disagree there. I love Le'Veon. I think.
Yeah, I mean the matchup's great, and I think when you're looking at my issue is when I'm already looking at limiting exposure because they're so high priced, and you have to hit such a high output to pay off value, and then you add in the win concern.
Yeah.
I'm starting to be like, okay, I'm gonna only put like 10% on him.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's totally fair. I follow the logic. I think the win doesn't hurt him. That's my opinion. I think it might even help him a little bit. But it's a tough situation. I can understand being underweight on Le'Veon for sure. I just probably won't be underweight. I'll probably be about even with the field. But you're right. And as far as that expensive running back tier goes, Ezekiel Elliott I don't think is very playable for me at all. DeMarco Murray is definitely a good option, but there's so many other options in that game as well.
Have you heard any updates on his toe? I mean, that was talked about a lot this week.
I haven't heard any updates. I don't think I'd be too concerned about it. The thing I'd be more concerned about is I don't think he has like massive upside. I think he could probably hit value, but I don't think I don't think he's going to have a 30-point game. I think he could have maybe a 20 to 25-point game, which is what we've seen from him a lot. But now his price is up above 8,000. I think, when it was in the 77, 7,500 range, it was much more palatable than when he's at 8,200. So I love LaShawn McCoy this week. I think he's probably one of my favorite running backs to play this week. Love Todd Gurley. I think Todd Gurley in a close game against a bad rush defense is something I like as well.
Yeah, I have a ton of McCoy and a ton of Spencer Ware, because those are two guys that, to get back to the point I was kind of slowly making, I don't love the top options. They're so high priced, and I don't really love a lot of cheap receivers this week. I don't really love a lot of cheap running backs. I like a few of them. We mentioned like a Crowell, but I'm ending up with my construction with a lot of like middle to mid upper tier pricing structure across my lineups, and I really like it. I feel like I'm building some pretty strong lineups, and Ware and McCoy are a big part of that. Like, you're getting them at 6,000 and 6,900 on DraftKings, whereas the other top running backs have shot up over 8,000, and I think those guys have pretty much just as much upside as the other options that you're paying a little bit more for. So I really like those guys.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think Ware's a good play. Tampa Bay is definitely better against the run than they are the pass, but they've been much worse in the second half of the year than they were in the first half of the year. The first half of the year, they had a really strong rush defense, and for whatever reason, they haven't been as good lately. So I think Spencer Ware is definitely in play. I continue to come back to Todd Gurley this week, and if I'm on Todd Gurley, then he's probably not the worst play, because I'm not a Todd Gurley guy this year in general from a season-long perspective. I think he's a fantastic running back, probably one of the best in the league. But I just think this is a week for Todd Gurley in a close game. Miami, as far as rushing yardage they allow a ton of rushing yardage, 128.8 yards per game. So I don't see any reason Todd Gurley can't break the century mark. If he breaks the century mark, that's 13 points right there. Get a touchdown, that's 19, a couple pass catches. You're talking over a 20-point game for a guy who's at $5,000. That's fantastic, because Todd Gurley should not be a $5,000 price running back in a normal good offense, and the Rams haven't been a normal good offense. But I think this is a situation where they can at least keep the game close, and if they keep it close, Todd Gurley get work all the way through the fourth quarter, and that also, if it's close, he'll get some receptions. So that's kind of nice as well.
Yeah, with the logic there, I've kind of got off him, but I am concerned about it, because I think he's definitely a good play. Question about thoughts on Rob Kelly. I'm not playing him this week, but I think he's an interesting play. I think he can certainly play him in tournaments.
Yeah, I think Rob Kelly is definitely in play in tournaments. The Redskins should move the ball, even with the win game. They should still move the ball. The game is still 48.5 point total right now, so it's not like it's come crashing down to 42 or 43 or 44 or anything like that. So the ball will still be moved. Individual players will be usable in this game. I think Randall Cobb is still a great play in this game in the Washington Green Bay game, because of that short passing game, and the slot matchup is good for him. I think Rob Kelly, I think Jordan Reed's fine. I just don't think stacking quarterbacks with their receivers in this game is the right thing, because it really impacts the quarterback as well as deep threat receivers.
Good. Yeah. Agreed there. Thoughts on Theo Riddick? We did just discuss that. He said, sorry, I might have missed this, but just joined.
No worries.
My one note on him is Jacksonville is the number one pass DVOA against running backs. So I'm a little bit hesitant, because so much of his value comes from reception.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. So
a very interesting play, though. I think we both mentioned that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So
good rush matchup, not as great of a passing matchup, and his upside is usually tied to getting like 7 or 8 receptions.
If you're playing anybody, my question to you, if you're playing anybody besides Dez and Dak in this Baltimore-Dallas game, who would it be?
I have zero exposure to anyone else in that game.
Fair enough.
It's a issue for me. I'm playing no one on Baltimore's side. And on the road, it's better conditions. Obviously, they're going to be down in Dallas, than a lot of these are going to be indoor. But I have a hard time figuring out who to play
Yep.
from.
Yeah, it was my story time this week, and I said fade the ever loving shit out of this game. And I am, but I'm with you. I'm not playing Dak. I'm playing some Dez, and I will play a little bit of Steve Smith. He's got that great matchup against Orlando Scandrick, and I really love Dez this week. I think between the passing touchdowns that you can throw on Baltimore. They've allowed a lot this year, as you showed in your betting lines article. The fact that Jimmy Smith is out, I think Dez Bryant is a fantastic play. And, for those people that'll be on an Odell Beckham or an Antonio Brown in these win games, I think Dez Bryant makes a whole lot more sense as a pivot play off of them.
Dallas DST question there. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the defenses, sure.
Yep, the defenses in a low scoring game are fine. Pretty much in any low-scoring game. But the one thing that Jonathan Bales loves to do that I mentioned on the DFS podcast earlier this week is Jonathan Bales actually likes taking defenses in really high-scoring games because their ownership percentage is so extremely low. So he likes taking the favored defense, especially if they're at home in a high-scoring game, because people are afraid of using them because they're going to give up points, but points really don't correlate with upside in DFS. Points allowed, touchdowns and interceptions and things like that correlate with, sacks. Sacks are good for cash games. I think they don't necessarily correlate with upside as much. They do. I mean, that means you're getting pressure on the quarterback, but interceptions, pick sixes are really the big thing in high scoring games, or maybe a punt return for a touchdown. Because if it's high scoring, there's a lot more possessions, there's a lot more opportunities to make a pick six or to get a punt return or a kickoff return or things like that. So, and there is more opportunity for sacks. They're just 1-pointers, but you get these 6 or 8 point events. If you get a pick six, it's an 8-point event because of the pick and the touchdown. So, for example, somebody like the Redskins, I think, are a very interesting play this week. A high total game. Now it's a wind game. They're favored at home. I think Indy is an interesting play. Marcus Mariota does turn the ball over from time to time. So, you can even stack this Indy Tennessee game, still have a piece of the Tennessee offense and play the Indy defense as well. I mean, that's totally viable. And that's something Bales likes to do because these are going to be low-owned defenses, and all they need is a touchdown or a touchdown and a couple sacks to, really exceed value. Even if they give up 30 points, that, you get 0 points for scoring touchdowns, but maybe you get 2 picks and a touchdown. That's 10 points right there, plus throwing a couple sacks. All of a sudden, you're looking at a 13-point game from your 2K or $2,500 defense. And the other nice thing is the defenses in high-scoring games are priced down. So instead of paying $3,500 for 16 fantasy points, you're paying $2,500 for 16 fantasy points. So I like targeting defenses in high-scoring games. I think that's a really, really good contrarian move by Bales there. And he did that a couple weeks ago in that San Diego game. I forget who they were playing, but it was San Diego Miami, and San Diego got like 2 defensive touchdowns or something, and it was a high scoring game. And so that's kind of how he targets his defenses.
Yeah, good defense insight there. I'm not the defense guy to ask, to be honest. I struggle at picking Ds, but that's some really good insight in terms of.
Well, yeah, same here. I'm terrible picking Ds, so I'm just gonna cherry pick off the best. Cherry pick off of Bales.
Smart, yeah. Anything else you want to get covered here, or are we getting pretty close?
I think we're pretty close. One game we haven't touched on really that I kind of wanted to ask about was this Buffalo Cincinnati game. It's not really a wind game. It's about 12 miles an hour. We should see or less. So I think that's a pretty good situation. Are you besides LaShawn McCoy and maybe AJ Green, are you using anybody else in this game?
Tyler Eifert, yeah, he was somebody else I was going to ask you about. I'm using a little bit of him. I can't remember where I heard it, but there were some interesting notes about the last time that AJ Green faced Rex Ryan and how they doubled him and kind of tried to take him out of the equation. And Marvin Jones saw 9 targets, and Eifert scored a touchdown in that game. The last time that the Bengals played the Bills, whether it was last year or the year before, can't recall. But interesting note, has me a little bit concerned about Green, and also think that the other receiving options, in particular Eifert, are. If Rex Ryan keys on Green, they obviously have higher upside there. And then really like LaShawn McCoy in this game. That's the guy that I'm the heaviest on in this game. And the Bills D. The Bills D have been a pretty like my issue with Andy Dalton. I know you mentioned you like him, is that he's been getting hit lot this year. He's been sacked a lot this year, and the Bills D generates a lot of pressure. So I can see the Bills D being interesting as well.
Yeah, they did play Buffalo last year, and you're right. AJ Green was held to 4 for 36. Marvin Jones had 9 for 95 and a touchdown. So maybe this is a situation you want to play. Eifert went 4 for 30 for a touchdown last year. Marvin Jones, like I said, he's kind of filling in this Brandon LaFell role now. So maybe LaFell is an interesting play.
If it's important to all of you, it's important to us. So we're renewing.
Sorry, I muted myself by accident. So I think Brandon LaFell is an interesting play as well. I love Andy Dalton. He threw for 3 touchdowns against the Bills last year, and he in non-division games he is so good. He's so good in non-division games. So I love Andy Dalton at home in a weekend where there's a lot of quarterbacks in wind games. I think Eli Manning. I really liked him until the wind stuff. I liked Kirk Cousins until all the wind stuff. There's just a lot of win games that I think have taken me off of a subset of quarterbacks that I would probably be higher exposed to. So now I'm trying to find quarterbacks that might get a little bit of exposure. And I love Andy Dalton. Tyrod Taylor, I think you can play him by himself, naked Tyrod, or you can do Tyrod, LaShawn McCoy stack. I don't even know if I'd necessarily stack Tyrod with any of his receivers. He's one of those guys where if a receiver gets a touchdown, it might be like a 3 for 30 and a touchdown type game, because that's kind of what you get with this Bills passing offense. They don't throw for a ton of yardage, but Tyrod Taylor's had 35 rushing yards in each of his last 4 games, and in most of his games this year. He's got touchdowns, a lot of rushing touchdowns this year. So he has solo upside as well, or like stacking him and LaShawn McCoy.
Fair enough. One more question here. We'll probably get wrapped up. But Procise and Baldwin.
I think you're muted, Ben.
What's that? Can you hear me?
Oh, nope, you're not muted. I'm an idiot.
One last question here. Procise and Baldwin in the same cash lineup. I'm fine with it. I don't see like a huge issue there. I know Philly's defense is really good. I'm probably not using Baldwin in cash because he's more TD dependent, not as like.
I agree. I wouldn't use Baldwin in cash personally, but if you want to use Baldwin in cash, I have no problem using him with Procise. I don't know if I'll have either of those two in cash games, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think fading Procise is totally in play here. I do think he has a pretty stable floor in terms of touches. Sorry for my big yawn, but
you're good.
Some receiving, he should get some rushing. Again, we talked about how his upside is limited, so I don't see why fading him is gonna like bite you in the butt. I really don't think it's gonna kill you. So
nah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I think that's all we got this week. We still need some time to set our final lineups as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you want to hit one last question here. Let's pivot off Cousins in cash, Kaepernick or Tyrod, or move stuff around to get to Mariota or Luck. I'm up at Mariota and Luck. I would try and move stuff around to get up to him.
I like Luck. I would move stuff around to get to Luck, and I also like Tyrod.
There you go. Any thoughts on Mike Evans? We both like Mike Evans as well before we sign off.
Yep.
Definitely a good a tournament play for sure.
I'm with you.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch up with you guys next week. And
have a good one, everyone.
Thursday show as well, or our Thursday podcast on the daily.
30% discount, rotoviz.com/podcast.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.